Hello. When We Were Very Young by A. Milne. What? Children's poetry? Yes, unapologetically and unashamedly so. These poems have been a part of my life really for most of my life. Indeed, I first knew a couple of these poems before I knew them as poems, as songs. When I was a little boy, indeed when I was very young, uh, I used to hear them regularly on Saturday mornings, listening to children's favourites on the BBC Light programme. Now, if you're British and of the same generation as me, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're British and younger, or American, or from another country, the chances are that that will be, but it doesn't matter. The recordings were made by Alice Stevens in 1941. She was only 9 or 10 years old when she made the recordings. That was the very first poem in the When We Were Very Young collection, Buckingham Palace, and also the final poem in the collection called Vespers, which she actually recorded as a duet with Christopher Robin himself. So these stories, these poems, I should say, as I say, always been with me. As testament, the my paperback copy, which has also been with me a good long time. And as you can see, I mean, I daren't even read from these because they are rather in in imminent danger of collapse. Um, while I was planning and preparing to read uh, When We Were Very Young, a new long form interview with Clive Barker was published on his website. And suddenly, in the midst of talking about poetry and, as usual, a host and a myriad of other things, as Clive will, he mentioned When We Were Very Young, and indeed he started quoting from some of the poems. Now, it didn't come as a surprise to me that Clive is a fan. I've known that for as long as I've known Clive, which is longer than either he or I would care to admit these days. Um, but I just saw it as a strange, well, not so much a coincidence. I would like to think of it more as a synchronicity that he should suddenly be talking about When We Were Very Young and A. Milne as I was in the midst of preparing to record these poems, because I don't think Clive and I have had a conversation about A. Milne in decades. But as I say, the poems have always been a part of my life. These and the second collection of poems. Now We Are Six. So when I saw that When We Were Very Young had come into public domain, I thought I would seize the chance. Also, of course, the Winnie the Pooh stories, and I would love to be able to read those, but I'm not sure that I can. I don't think they're in public domain, and I believe Disney has a say in these things these days. I think Disney now owns the name Winnie the Pooh. In fact, I read that Pooh now earns more money for Disney than Mickey Mouse. But if it's just the name he owns, then maybe I could read the stories and call him, I don't know, Hinny the Moo or something like that, and wouldn't be a problem. Because can you even can you even own Piglet or Rabbit? I guess maybe with a capital P and a capital R, you can. Just to confuse the picture in terms of names, in the very first Winnie the Pooh story, Christopher Robin is adamant that Pooh is not called Winnie the Pooh. We all call him that. We all put the emphasis on the third part of the name, Winnie the Pooh. Christopher Robin is adamant that he should be called Winnie the Pooh, with the emphasis on the, Winnie the Pooh. Um, so maybe I could get round it that way. And indeed, things get even more confused. A. Milne wrote a brief introduction to When We Were Very Young, in which he introduced us to the first iteration of Pooh, which reveals that he wasn't even a bear at all. Given the game away, but never mind. He says in the introduction, you will find some lines about a swan here if you get as far as that. I'm actually not going to read that poem, but never mind. And I should have explained to you in the note that Christopher Robin, who feeds this swan in the mornings, has given him the name of Pooh. This is a very fine name for a swan, because if you call him and he doesn't come, which is a thing swans are good at, then you can pretend that you were just saying Pooh, Pooh, to show how little you wanted him. So there you are, Swanee the Pooh, originally. And indeed, Pooh makes an appearance in these poems, but he's not called Winnie the Pooh, so don't panic. He's simply referred to as Teddy Bear, or indeed Mr. Edward Bear, but in the wonderful, wonderful, timeless illustrations of the great E.H. Shepard, there is absolutely no doubt who we're talking about. I think Milne's writing is superb. It's very simple, very direct language, and I'm not a writer myself, but I spend a lot of time around words one way or another, and it seems to me very difficult to write in such very simple language so brilliantly and creatively as Milne does so consistently across quite a wide range of styles as he does here. And we are in a very specific English British social milieu. We are in the world of the upper class in the 1920s in England. It is a world of nurseries and nannies. When the children lived in the nursery, they played in the nursery, they ate in the nursery, and they slept in the nursery, and Nanny was with them all day and all night. Nanny slept in the nursery with them too. And the children would be presented to the parents at various times during the day for activities, or, you know, to be patted on the head and sent on their way or whatever. Not a lot of hands-on parenting going on in the upper classes of England in the 1920s. That's the milieu in which it's set. It's just the way it is. And in spite of that, Milne, I think, is very unsentimental in his approach to writing about children. I think he's extremely good at getting inside the often contrary heads of children. And he never condescends to his audience. He's quite happy to drop in the occasional word that no self-respecting preschooler should know or understand, like adiposity. I certainly would have had no idea what that meant if I had been reading these poems when I was 5 or 6 years old. A brief biographical note. A.A. Milne, the A.A. is Alan Alexander, was born in the Kilburn area of London in 1882, and his father ran a small independent school in that area. Milne grew up living in the school. He was a pupil in the school. He was briefly taught at that school by H.G. Wells, no less, the author of The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine, amongst many others. Milne went on to Trinity College, Cambridge, to study, perhaps surprisingly, mathematics. But his literary career began at Cambridge when he became a contributor to and an editor of Granta, which is the Cambridge University Students' Magazine. And his work on Granta led to an offer of work at Punch, which was a very well-known, very famous, and leading British satirical magazine at the time, and indeed throughout the 20th century. And Milne eventually became an assistant editor at Punch. In fact, I believe some of these poems saw the light of day for the first time in the pages of Punch. He was a keen cricketer, which I mention only because I'm a keen cricket fan and occasional, not very highly talented player of the game. Um, Milne played for an amateur side whose members also included J.M. Barrie, Arthur Conan Doyle, and P.G. Wodehouse. So it's a grand conceit to me to think that at one remove we had Winnie the Pooh, Peter Pan, Sherlock Holmes, and Jeeves and Wooster all playing cricket together at the same time. Milne fought in World War I. He was injured at the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and invalided out of the army, and for the remainder of the war he wrote propaganda articles for MI7, which was a branch of the British intelligence services, disbanded at the end of the war. Milne had married in the year before the outbreak of war, 1913. His son was born after the war in 1920, and the family moved from London to East Sussex near Ashdown Forest, which, reinvented as the 100-Acre Wood, of course became the setting for the Pooh stories. And that son, of course, was Christopher Robin Milne, who had, I think it's fair to say, a difficult relationship with his father. I don't think he I think he was unhappy with the idea that he had been exploited as a very young child for financial gain for his father, and I think perhaps also being given the cross to bear throughout his life of being Christopher Robin didn't help. It was these were feelings which Milne himself shared to some extent. He also came to resent that these collections of poems, and of course the Winnie the Pooh stories, would ensure that despite the rest of his literary output, he would always be saddled with the tag of children's author, which, quite absurdly, but nevertheless I think it is true, tends to carry a slightly condescending and pejorative tone to it. When We Were Very Young was published in 1924, and the second volume of poems, Now We Are Six, was published in 1927, with the two collections of Pooh stories, Winnie the Pooh and The House at Pooh Corner, published in between them. In addition to his work at Punch, Milne was a playwright, a prolific playwright. He also wrote a detective novel and contributed several screenplays to the nascent early British film industry in the 1920s. And he died in 1956 at the age of 74. If you're hearing some banging noises off, by the way, it's a shooting range out near where I live. Americans engaging in their favourite pastime of practicing killing their fellow citizens. Not at all appropriate for the world of When We Were Very Young. Nevertheless, enough words from me, on to A.A. Milne and When We Were Very Young. Actually, let me say one more thing. I'm not reading all the poems. These are my selections, and I'm not going to read them all in one go either. I'm going to read them in two chunks. That's a highfalutin literary expression, a chunk of poems. So this is When We Were Very Young, Chunk 1, by A.A. Milne. Buckingham Palace. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Alice is marrying one of the guard. A soldier's life is terrible hard, says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We saw a guard in a sentry box. One of the sergeants looks after their socks, says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We looked for the king, but he never came. Well, God take care of him all the same, says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. They've great big parties inside the grounds. I wouldn't be king for £100, says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. A face looked out, but it wasn't the king's. "He's much too busy assigning things," says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. "Do you think the king knows all about me?" "He's sure to, dear. But it's time for tea," says Alice. Happiness. John had great big waterproof boots on. John had a great big waterproof hat. John had a great big waterproof mackintosh. "And that," said John, "is that." Puppy and I. I met a man as I went walking. We got talking, man and I. "Where are you going to, man?" I said to the man as he went by. "Down to the village to get some bread. Will you come with me?" "No, not I." I met a horse as I went walking. We got talking, horse and I. "Where are you going to, horse?" I said to the horse as he went by. "Down to the village to get some hay. Will you come with me?" "No, not I." I met a woman as I went walking. We got talking, woman and I. "Where are you going to, woman, today?" I said to the woman as she went by. "Down to the village to get some barley. Will you come with me?" "No, not I." I met some rabbits as I went walking. We got talking, rabbits and I. "Where are you going to, rabbits, today?" I said to the rabbits as they went by. "Down to the village to get some oats. Will you come with us?" "No, not I." I met a puppy as I went walking. We got talking, puppy and I. "Where are you going to, puppy, today?" I said to the puppy as he went by. "Up to the hills to roll and play." "I'll come with you, puppy," said I. The Four Friends. Ernest was an elephant, a great big fellow. Leonard was a lion with a 6-foot tail. George was a goat, and his beard was yellow. And James was a very small snail. Leonard had a stall, and a great big strong one. Ernest had a manger, and its walls were thick. George found a pen, but I think it was the wrong one. And James sat down on a brick. Ernest gave a trumpet and cracked his manger. Leonard started roaring and shivered his stall. James gave the huffle of a snail in danger, and nobody heard him at all. Ernest started trumpeting and raised such a rumpus. Leonard started roaring and trying to kick. James went a journey with the goat's new compass, and he reached the end of his brick. Ernest was an elephant and very well-intentioned. Leonard was a lion with a brave new tail. George was a goat, as I think I have mentioned. But James was only a snail. Lines and squares. Whenever I walk in a London street, I'm ever so careful to watch my feet, and I keep in the squares, and the masses of bears who wait at the corners all ready to eat the sillies who tread on the lines of the street go back to their lairs. And I say to them, "Bears, just look how I'm walking in all the squares." And the little bears growl to each other, "He's mine," as soon as he's silly and steps on a line. And some of the bigger bears try to pretend that they came round the corner to look for a friend, and they try to pretend that nobody cares whether you walk on the lines or the squares. But only the silliest believe their talk. It's ever so important how you walk, and it's ever so jolly to call out, "Bears, just watch me walking in all the squares." That's a train going by the way. I'm sitting on the back deck of my house outside, so slightly at the mercy of the elephants. I don't mean the elephants. Back to the four friends, the elements, and noises off. I think it might be an idea. The trains run through a valley. Then it may sound like it's going past the bottom of my yard, but that isn't the case. It's a good at least half a mile or more away, but the sound kind of gets trapped in the valley and rolls around. They're very long too, as anyone familiar with American trains might know. Well, I can't wait forever, so we'll move on to Brownie. In a corner of the bedroom is a great big curtain. Someone lives behind it, but I don't know who. I think it is a brownie, but I'm not quite certain. Nanny isn't certain too. I looked behind the curtain, but he went so quickly. Brownies never wait to say how do you do. They wriggle off at once because they're all so tickly. Nanny says they're tickly too. Independence. I never did like now. Take care, dear. I never did want. Hold my hand. I never did think much of. Not up there, dear. It's no good saying it. They don't understand. Market Square. I had a penny, a bright new penny. I took my penny to the market square. I wanted a rabbit, a little brown rabbit, and I looked for a rabbit most everywhere. For I went to the stall where they sold sweet lavender, only a penny for a bunch of lavender. Have you got a rabbit? 'Cause I don't want lavender. But they hadn't got a rabbit, not anywhere there. I had a penny, and I had another penny. I took my pennies to the market square. I did want a rabbit, a little baby rabbit, and I looked for rabbits most everywhere. And I went to the stall where they sold fresh mackerel. Now then, tuppence for a fresh caught mackerel. Have you got a rabbit? 'Cause I don't like mackerel. But they hadn't got a rabbit, not anywhere there. I found a sixpence, a little white sixpence. I took it in my hand to the market square. I was buying a rabbit. I do like rabbits, and I looked for my rabbit most everywhere. So I went to the stall where they sold fine saucepans. Walk up, sixpence for a saucepan. Could I have a rabbit? 'Cause we've got 2 saucepans. But they hadn't got a rabbit, not anywhere there. I had nothing. No, I didn't have nothing. So I didn't go down to the market square. But I walked on the common, the old gold common, and I saw little rabbits most everywhere. So I'm sorry for the people who sell fine saucepans. I'm sorry for the people who sell fresh mackerel. I'm sorry for the people who sell sweet lavender, 'cause they haven't got a rabbit, not anywhere there. And finally, with the sound of a truck reversing, disobedience. James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." James Morrison's mother put on a golden gown. James Morrison's mother went to the end of town. James Morrison's mother drove... I beg your pardon. These are live. I promised no retakes, no edits. I will start this poem again, forgive me. And the lorry is done reversing, the truck, sorry, Americans. Disobedience. James James Morrison Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." James James Morrison's mother put on a golden gown. James James Morrison's mother drove to the end of town. James James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, "I can get right down to the end of the town and be back in time for tea." King John put up a notice. "Lost, or stolen, or strayed. James James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord. She tried to get down to the end of the town. 40 shillings reward." James James Morrison Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town without consulting me." James James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King John said he was sorry, so did the Queen and Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, "If people go down to the end of the town, well, what can anyone do?" Now then, very softly, J. J. M. M. W. G. Dup took great CO his M, though he was only 3. J. J. said to his M, he said he, "You must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." That's it. End of chunk 1. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope you'll join me for chunk 2 of When We Were Very Young. In the meantime, as always, thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.